Tan Sri Dr. Syarifah Hafsah Syed Hassan Syabudin, Vice Chancellor Universiti Kebangsaan Malaysia, Yang berbahagia Prof. Dato' Dr. Hassan Basri, Deputy Vice Chancellor, Academic and International Affairs, UKM, Prof. Dennis J. Encarnation, Harvard University, Mr. Desmond Yu, Advisor, Lam Kim Chong Morningstar Charity Fund, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. Good afternoon and thank you for gracing this afternoon occasion. Prof. Encarnation and Mr. Desmond, selamat datang, Kuan Ling, and welcome to Universiti Kebangsaan Malaysia. It is indeed our pleasure to welcome all of you to our beautiful campus in conjunction with the Harvard EZRA VOGEL Malaysia-Singapore Initiative Public Lecture Series. To begin this afternoon's program, I would like to invite our guests to sit back and view a short video on activities and achievement of Universiti Kebangsaan Malaysia. Malaysia-Singapore Initiative Public Lecture Series. This program involved the participation of professors from Harvard University and is co-organized by UKM, Harvard University Asia Center, and Lam Kim Chong Morningstar Charity Fund. Without further ado, I would like to invite Yang berbahagia Prof. Tan Sri Dr. Syarifah Hafsah Syed Hassan Syabudin, Vice Chancellor UKM, to welcome Prof. Encarnation and introduce him to the audience this afternoon.
Thank you, Zee. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Good afternoon. So we have Professor Dennis Encarnation. It's not the right word, but he will tell you what it is because I don't want to mispronounce the way it should be pronounced. Our guest speaker for today, Mr. Desmond Yu from the Lam Kim Chong Morningstar Charity Fund, representing Dr. Lam, I believe. Again, unfortunately, he's unable to be with us this afternoon. And please convey our best wishes and tell him we miss him. And we have two vice chancellors with us today. I would like to recognize them. Professor Dato' Zaini Ujang of the University Technology Malaysia, and is Professor Dato' Joseph Adakal. Where are you sitting? Is he here? Or his name appears on my list. Professor Engineer Hassan Basri, who's our Deputy Vice Chancellor and in charge of International Affairs as well as academic. So distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. As Zee mentioned, we are hosting the third lecture in the EZRA VOGEL Malaysia-Singapore Initiative, and it's named after Professor Vogel, who served as the director of Harvard University Asia Center from 1997 to 1999. And of course, these lectures are aimed at strengthening Harvard University's links with universities across Southeast and South Asia. And this series begins with Singapore and Malaysia. It's sponsored by Lam Kim Chong Morningstar Charity Fund, which is based in Hong Kong. And we are proud that Harvard University Asia Center, which focuses on international relations in Asia and comparative studies of Asian countries and regions, has selected UKM in Malaysia and Nanyang Technological University in Singapore to be the partners for this series. And we hosted the inaugural lecture last October, by Professor Sugata Bose on the topic, The Idea of Asia in Modern History. For those of you who were here, that was very interesting. And in May this year, we had Professor Tu Wai Ming, and his lecture was Toward a Dialogical Civilization. Professor Tu Wai Ming has since left Harvard and has set up an institute in Beijing, I think on the invitation of the Chinese government. So in the 5-year period from 2009, we will continue to host the lectures twice a year, and we hope to see all of you every time, because each new lecture opens up opportunities for our students and faculty, as well as our invited guests, to interact with internationally acclaimed Harvard academics from various fields. Today we are honored to have Professor Dennis Encarnation to deliver his lecture. His work began at Duke University, where you received 3 degrees. And he continued at Stanford and taught for 3 years before joining Harvard. And in 1982, 28 years ago, you joined Harvard and you just retired from Harvard. So, and of course, in the first half of his career at Harvard, it was at the Harvard Business School. So then you were in the Center for Business and Government in the John F. Kennedy School of Government, where you founded the Center's first Asia program. And as stated in the brochure, you can read it, this award-winning course on Asia in the world economy. So we hope to hear a lot about this afternoon. Now he consults very widely for many multinational corporations and government agencies and multilateral institutions, non-governmental organizations, and he's no stranger to Malaysia, of course. Being in Penang, he's been here many times, I believe, and he loves the durian. As we had our lunch this afternoon, he was asking for durian. Unfortunately, it's not the season. He has lived and worked around the world. Your doctoral research in India. You've done sabbaticals here in Southeast Asia, in China, Ministry of International Trade and Industry in Japan. You've even taught at INSEAD in France, and many clients in Latin America. So you've got a vast experience. You've got this knowledge about the world. I cannot think of a more appropriate person to talk about this topic that is so important to us since 1997. I think Malaysia has never been the same. And I think in this part of the world, we have all changed a lot. And it's not just an interest to the staff and students from our Faculty of Business and Management and the Graduate School of Business, but I believe to everyone present here. So it gives me great privilege to now invite Dr. Dennis Encarnation to deliver his lecture, Asia and the World Economy, Before and After the Great Recession of 2008. I actually started earlier, 1997.
Madam Vice Chancellor, professors, distinguished guests, first let me thank you for inviting me to Malaysia. One of my definitions of Malaysia, and I experienced it at lunch, is Malaysia is that one country where, as you're finishing one meal, you begin plotting your next meal. So between here and the airport, I have a real long list, rendang and a few other things that I must get as I jalan my way back to the airport. I'm not sure that durian is going to be on that list. I tend to prefer my durian on airplanes. If you've been wondering why they have that sign at the airport that says durian not allowed, I'm afraid that I was one of the causes of that at an earlier time. I especially enjoy doing it with the Feringgi and seeing how they respond. My topic today is going to be Asia and the world economy, and I'm going to bound the conversation by looking at the period immediately before what we are increasingly referring to as the Great Recession of 2008. During that recession, and at least some best guesses, let's call these predictions, but really best guesses, as to what we might see coming out of this recession on the other side. And so it is in that context that I want to talk not only about current trends, Asia's relative position within those current trends, but also to understand how Asia compares to other regions in the world. Because much of what we're going to talk about with regard to Asia, we could say about Latin America, we could say about slices of economies that have little to do with geography, such as the BRICS, Brazil, Russia, India, and China. So you'll see that throughout our conversation, I will try to slice and dice the world economy in a variety of ways, and hopefully in doing so reveal certain aspects that I think are important in our times. Oops, I did something wrong. Technologically challenged I am. It was one of those buttons, just the next one now. What I've done on this chart, on the left-hand side, is define the crisis. This is a rendering of what was happening to the gross domestic product, so the final output of goods and services in 52 countries. Suffice it to say, let's just call that the world economy. And what I want you to do is to see, just stay on that left-hand side of the chart, and see the sort of the order of magnitude and the pace at which the world economy collapsed. And it is usually in the context of that collapse that people make all sorts of historical references. References to the Great Depression, thus the phrase the Great Recession, to be used for the period that we're currently living in. It's a collapse that had no precedent until the very early part of the 20th century. But the real interesting part to me about this chart is not what exists on the left, it's what you see on the right. Because even more unprecedented than the collapse has been the recovery. The speed, the pace at which the recovery has happened, and the magnitude of the recovery. If we stay with the comparison on the left, which the comparative point is the Great Depression, I assure you that the Great Depression did not recover with the same pace, with the same order of magnitude. To the contrary, it took virtually a decade and a great war, or a series of wars, to get us out of that last Great Recession or Great Depression. We haven't had to suffer that, at least not in our current time. What I also want you to do as you look at this chart is imagine that you are at the nadir, at the furthest point of decline in the gross domestic product. So we're now sometime in late 2008, early 2009. Your predictive capabilities at that point in time, using the metaphor of the Great Depression back of the 1920s and 30s, your predictive capabilities to sort of say, this is what our recovery will look like, your predictive capabilities were zero. Were zero. So while there were a relatively small number of people who were predicting in advance the crisis that we faced in 2007, 2008, 2009, certainly talking about the housing bubble in the United States, certainly talking about the problems with the financial instruments, the bundling of those mortgages that were subsequently sold. All those kinds of things were discussed. And no one predicted the date, but there were lots of conversations about the downward pressure and the popping of the bubble. At least there was some hint that we had some sense of what might happen to us. No one would have predicted recovery. And it's the recovery that I want to focus on. Because